All right, in order to add and subtract fractions, we must be good at finding the lowest common multiple, because using the lowest common multiple allows us to find the common denominator. And anytime we have to add fractions, we must have the common denominator. So as an example here, before we get started, because we have a common denominator, both are 9 here, we can immediately add the top numerators, 2 plus 5, which is 7, and we keep the denominator the same. So with a question like this, there's no finding common denominator. You can just add the top and leave the denominator the same. All right. Same with this question here. If we want to subtract, we can leave the denominator as an 11 because they're common amongst the two fractions. And you would just have to say 8 minus 3, and that would be 5. Now these questions here, they do not have a common denominator, 8 and 4, 6 and 4. So we cannot go about adding or subtracting them immediately. So what we need to do is know how to find the lowest common multiple. And there's a few different ways we can do this. Now, the first way is if you write out 5, a multiple is something, well, where we take the number 5 and we multiply it by 1, 2, 3, 4, and we see what we get. For example, the first multiple of 5 is 5 times 1, which is 5. And now 5 times 2 is 10. And we start multiplying them out, and then we put them down as a list there. And now we can do the exact same thing with 8. So we start here, and we start with 8 times 1, and then times 2, times 3, times 4, and then times 5. So as you can see with 5 and 8, there's still nothing common. We want something common that they're sharing. So if you look at these lists of numbers, currently, they don't share anything. So what we need to do is take 5 and increase it some more, because we're only at 20 right now with 5. So if I keep going, I'm going to have 25, 30, 35, and then finally I hit this 40, and now I have the lowest number that both of these lists have in common. So that's one way we can find the lowest common multiple of these two numbers. So of course, if we were to add something when we have, let's say we have 1 over 5 plus 3 over 8. In order to add these two, we would need to have the common denominator. And now, because I've shown you what the lowest common multiple of 5 and 8 is, we know that it's 40. We could write now both these fractions with a common denominator of 40. All right, so that's our goal when we're finding the lowest common multiple. Okay, but of course this method here is a little bit long and you have to write a lot of numbers out, so we do have another method. Okay, so if I show you this method, it might be easier when you have bigger numbers. Now if you know your multiplication, you can easily know in your head that the lowest multiple that these two are is actually 8 times 5. If you multiply these two, you get 40. But that's not always the case, so I don't always encourage people just to multiply these two numbers, because it could give you a very big number. So let's look at another number for lowest common multiple, but we're going to do it a little bit different. Let's find a different method here so that it's a little bit easier. So imagine we have 12 and 15 and we draw our division table here. Okay, so just so that we know why we're finding the lowest common multiple, what we'll do is we'll have one fraction, which is 1 over 12 plus 2 over 15. So imagine we were trying to find the sum of these two fractions. In order to do that, we need a common denominator. So normally we would say, okay, what is common between 12 and 15? And once again, we have to go to this method of lowest common multiple. Okay, so let's go about and do it in a different way. So before I wrote out all the numbers here, and now I don't want to do this with my 12 and 15 because it could take a long time and I never know how many numbers I have to write out until I hit a common number. So let's try it this way. How about I start dividing 12 by prime numbers? So if I divide 12 by 2, I get 6, and I divide 6 by 2, and I have 3. 3 divided by 3, so that we get our 1. So we always want to do this final step here. So we have a 1 here. Next, I'm going to do this with the 15. I'm going to say, okay, a prime number, if I divide by 5, I get 3. Now, the only number I can divide by is 3 to get my 1. And here we are, we have a set of factors between these two numbers. Now the last step that we want to do once we've done this is write these out underneath here in 2 rows. So I'm going to write them separately here. So here's 12 and here's my 15. So I'm going to write out my factors here. So I have 3 factors, 2, 2, and 3 for 12. So I'm going to write them out 2, 2, and 3. All right. So now I want to write out my factors for 15. What I notice though is 15 has a 3 in it there, so I have to put the 3 underneath there because I have 1 3 matching. So these 2 3 matches, so I put them underneath each other. And if I look here, there's not a 5 that I can match, so I put a 5 on its own there. And now what we want to do is draw a line here underneath, and we're going to write out all the numbers here that are in our rows. So here I have a 2, so I put a 2 there. I have a 2, I put a 2 there. I have a 3 that's matched, so I put a 3 there, and I have a 5 there. And what I'm going to do is put multiplication in between all of them. So these numbers multiplied together is going to give me my lowest common multiple for 12 and 15. All right, so if we do that, we have 5 times 3, 15, times 2 is 30, times 2 is 60. So if we would have written out 12 and 15 in the first section here like this, so if we would have went 12 and 15 and started writing out all our numbers here, we would have eventually got 60 here. And if we would have wrote them out here, we would have eventually got 60 as well. So it would have taken a little bit of time, but we could do it that way. So now that I know that my lowest common multiple is 60, I'll go back to my fraction question. Well, I want to go 1/12 plus 2/15. And now I know that my common denominator here is 60 and 60. So the last step is, well, how do I go from 12 to 60? So you have to use your calculator if you need to, and you'll realize if you go 12 times 5, you get 60. So what I'm going to do is take the numerator and also multiply that by 5. So 1 times 5 is 5. So there we go. 1/12 is equivalent to 5 over 60. And I'm going to do this again. If I want to go from 15 to 60, if you look on your calculator and you go 60 divided by 15, you will get 4. So if you times by 4, 15 times 4, you should get 60. But that means I have to times the top by 4 as well. So of course, 2 times 4 is 8. And now I can finally add my fractions. So 8 plus 5 is 13. And remember, you don't change the denominator. All right. So anytime I want to add or subtract, I have to, first of all, find the lowest common multiple using one of these methods. So with 5 and 8, it was quite easy to write them out. With 12 and 15, maybe it takes some more time. And then with 42 and 45, this would take a long time. All right. So if I do one more down here and I ask myself, what's common between 8 and 4? Well, these are quite low numbers, so what you could do is go 8, 16, 24, and then you can start with 4 down here, and you say, okay, I have 4, 8, 12, 16, and then now I don't have to go any further because I notice that I have a match at 8. So 8 is the lowest common multiple for 5 over 8 plus 3/4. So if I want to just increase this by a little bit, 120. Now I want to go about adding these fractions. You can write 5 over 8 here plus 3/4. And what I want to do is write equivalent fractions. So we know the common denominator is 8. To go from 8 to 8, you times by 1. So I need to times the top numerator by 1. So 5 times 1 is 5. So each I'm going to times by 1. If I want to go from 4 to 8, I have to times that by 2. So I'm going to have to take 3 also and multiply that by 2. If I go 2 times 3, I get 6. And don't forget our plus sign in the middle. And now that we have a common denominator, we can write out the final answer. So 6 plus 5 is 11. 8 we don't change, so that's our common denominator, and now we have an improper fraction, which we can leave as an improper fraction. So there we go. That's how we have to add and subtract fractions.